dear listener, to Driftwood stories, where the hush of the forest carries old magic, and each tale is a lantern glowing softly through the trees. Tonight, as moonlight spills like silver across the mossy earth, and your thoughts drift like leaves upon a stream, we invite you into a woodland of wonder, where whispers follow winding paths, and every fern may hide a secret. This is the story of a red cloak, a quiet girl with listening eyes, and a journey beneath ancient boughs, where the wind knows your name, and the shadows are not always what they seem. So close your eyes if you wish, or watch the candle's gentle flicker. Let the world fall away for a time, and follow us now into the hush of the old woods, where Little Red Riding Hood walks softly beneath the pines, and the path of the ferns awaits. Chapter 1. The Scarlet Cloak. There was a village where the cobblestones held the warmth of old footsteps, and the chimneys whispered their soft breath into the morning fog. It sat quietly at the edge of a great forest, the kind that breathed with moss and mystery, where trees grew tall enough to remember ancient songs, and wildflowers bowed their sleepy heads toward the dawn. In that village there lived a girl named Eleonora, but no one called her Eleonora anymore. To the butcher and the baker, to the miller's wife and the children with skipping ropes, she was known as Little Red Riding Hood, a name earned not by her birth, but by a cloak of scarlet wool, so rich and deep it looked as though it had been dyed in the heart of a rose. It had been sewn by her grandmother long ago on a winter's night when the snow fell soft as ash and the hearth burned low. The thread was spun from sheep's wool and something finer, the kind of thread you couldn't see with your eyes, only feel with your heart. It was lined with rose petals, dried and pressed into the seams, and its hood was stitched with a sigil older than language, a charm for safe passage, a whisper against wolves. Eleonora wore it always, not out of vanity, but because it felt like a promise, a quiet one between her and the forest. She was neither loud nor quiet, bold nor shrinking. A girl of listening eyes and soft footsteps, she liked to rise early and walk the woodland trails when the dew still clung to the grass and the toadstools were plump with sleep. Her hands were often stained with berry juice or speckled with nettle bites, for she knew which leaves to touch and which to avoid. She had learned from her mother, and her mother before her, how to read the language of herbs, to brew teas for dreams and salves for sorrow. Her mother, Marin, was the village herbalist, the sort of woman others came to in the night, when coughs rattled their children or dreams grew too heavy. Their cottage stood where the village met the wilds, half garden, half forest, with a crooked gate and a roof the colour of rain. One morning, after 3 days of soft rain had turned the world to emerald, Eleonora awoke to the scent of thyme and sweet loaves. Her mother was kneeling in the herb beds, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands buried in damp soil. "Eleonora," she called without looking up. "Come, child." The girl stepped barefoot over the threshold, her red cloak trailing like a shadow. The air was rich with the scent of marjoram and wormwood. Maren rose slowly and wiped her hands on her apron. "Your grandmother's taken a chill again. I'd go myself, but old Mr. Curt fell from his ladder and won't stop grumbling. I've steeped rosemary wine and packed the thyme balm she likes for her knees. Take the honey cakes too. She always eats them even when she swears she has no appetite." Eleanora smiled. Her grandmother lived alone in a clearing 2 leagues into the forest, beyond the bend where the path split. She was a strong old woman, sharp-eyed and iron-willed, but the damp had a way of crawling into her bones like ivy into stone. Maren wrapped the bundle in linen and pressed it into Eleanora's basket. "Take the south path. It's drier after rain, though longer. Stay to the trail, and no picking mushrooms today. Not even the pretty ones. And remember," she placed a warm palm to her daughter's cheek, "listen to the forest. It has its ways of speaking." Eleanora nodded, eyes shining beneath the hood. She kissed her mother's wrist and pulled the cloak snug against the morning chill. As she stepped through the garden gate, a robin sang from the hawthorn tree. The air was fresh and soft with mist. Her boots pressed gently into the earth, and the path stretched ahead, ribboned with fallen leaves and glistening puddles. The forest was waking. Each branch creaked like a yawn, each fern unfurled like a thought. The trees here were old, their bark carved with moss and lichen. Some said the forest was enchanted, others said it was just deep and wild, and people mistook the wind's murmur for magic. Eleanora wasn't certain, but she knew the woods felt alive, not in the way animals were, but in the way rivers remember the stones they pass over. She passed beneath an arch of elder trees, their blossoms pale as milk, and paused by the creek to watch a pair of deer drinking. They looked up as one, eyes wide and dark, then bounded off in a blur of russet. The sound of their hooves faded like the last note of a song. The red of her cloak stood out against the greens and golds of the underbrush. It marked her, surely, but it also shielded her. The creatures of the forest had come to know that colour, and they never came too close. The deeper she walked, the softer the world became. Time thinned, like mist in morning sun. Her thoughts wandered to the basket in her hand, the cakes with honeycomb crusts, the wine steeped in rosemary sprigs. The balm her grandmother claimed smelled like thunderclouds and worked like wizardry. She thought of her grandmother's voice, raspy and fond, of the old woman's tales, of wolves that walked like men, and owls that whispered names to the moon. Stories not meant to frighten, but to remember. It was in the midst of these thoughts that Eleanora paused. The forest had grown very quiet. No birdsong, no chatter, only the soft creak of branches and the drip, drip, drip of water from the leaves. She glanced over her shoulder. Nothing, only trees and more trees. A squirrel frozen mid-scurry. A hush that pressed against her ears like snow. Something had shifted, and in the thick shade, behind a curtain of ferns, something watched. Chapter 2. The Stranger Among the Pines. The silence of the forest was not empty, it was full of listening. Eleonora paused, one foot still mid-step, her basket resting lightly against her hip. The ferns quivered, though no wind passed through. Even the birds had quieted, as if the trees themselves had drawn in a slow breath and were holding it. She tilted her head, listening not just with her ears, but with the quiet part of her heart that often understood things before her mind caught up, the way one senses a coming storm in the stillness of the air. The quiet was not wrong exactly, it was expectant. Then came a sound, the softest rustle, like velvet on moss. From between two dark pine trunks, a figure emerged, tall and narrow, as though the forest itself had carved him from shadow and bark. His coat was long and deep grey, like frost-bitten leaves. Silver buttons gleamed down the front, and the brim of his hat curved low, casting his face in shade. Only his smile showed clearly, curved, calm, and too perfect. "Well met, young traveller," he said, his voice cool and clear, like water sliding down glass. "You walk alone?" Eleonora took a measured step back. Her heel brushed a clump of ferns. "I walk to visit my grandmother," she replied, steady but soft. "She lives beyond the birch wood, near the bend in the river." He touched the brim of his hat in a smooth, theatrical bow. A noble errand for such a young soul, and such a vivid cloak, like a flame in all this green. "It keeps me warm," she said simply. "Ah," he said, eyes glinting, "warmth is valuable in a place like this. The forest is vast, and it forgets things. Names, directions, intentions. I've known paths to change beneath the feet of those who thought they knew the way." "I've walked this trail many times," Eleonora said. "Even the oldest trails," he murmured, "can grow teeth." He stepped to one side and gestured, and Eleonora saw it, a path she hadn't noticed before, winding softly beneath a lattice of pine boughs. It was beautiful, the sort of beauty that quiets the breath. Ferns curled like lace along its edge, and shafts of golden light pierced the canopy. No puddles marred its way. The trail looked gentle, dry, inviting. "This way is quicker," said the man. "Half the distance, no mud, no roots to trip on. I travel it often. I could walk with you." Eleonora hesitated. She looked down the path her mother had marked, winding, tangled, soft with fog. The south trail was known, familiar, but slow. Then she looked again at the stranger's road. It shimmered as if it had been swept clean only moments before, as if the forest wanted her to take it. "Why are you in the woods?" she asked him, her voice low. The man's smile twitched. "Oh, I gather stories," he said. "The forest is rich with them, lost ones especially, the tales that never made it home." He tilted his head. "Would you like to hear one?" Eleonora did not answer. Her fingers closed slightly around the handle of her basket. Something inside her stirred, a memory, a wordless warning. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her thoughts. "Some beasts wear charm like a ribbon, but look to the eyes, child. The eyes do not lie." She looked at his eyes now and saw nothing. They caught the light but held no depth, like mirrors, or stones. "I thank you," she said, her voice calm, "but I'll take the path, I know." She gave a small curtsy, polite as her grandmother had taught, and turned her boots toward the south trail. Behind her, the stranger stood still. "Suit yourself," he called, his voice lighter now, but strange, like silk pulled too tightly. "But be careful, Little Red. Even familiar roads can grow strange when no one's watching." She did not reply, nor did she look back. As the trees folded once more around her, the hush began to ease. A distant finch called. The breeze stirred again, brushing her cheek with the scent of pine and damp lichen. Her boots sank into the soft trail, wet with old rain. It was slower, muddier, real. She walked in silence for some time, but her thoughts were loud, not frightening, just alert. Awake. The man hadn't scared her, not quite, but he had unsettled something, like a mirror reflecting a crooked room. Everything he said had sounded pleasant, but left behind a shadow. She touched the edge of her cloak. The red wool was warm, steady. She imagined her grandmother's hands weaving it, years ago. Threads looped in firelight, rose petals pressed between pages. A cloak, yes, but also a promise. The forest shifted gently. The sun filtered in through higher branches now, softer, gold-tinged. A fox darted across the trail far ahead. A frog croaked from a puddle. Life was returning to the woods. Still, something trailed her. Not footsteps, just attention. "There are eyes," her grandmother once said, "that never blink. If you feel them, trust the feeling. That's the forest telling you to tread lighter." She stepped a little more carefully now, not out of fear, but out of knowing. A squirrel leapt from one tree to the next, chittering loudly as it went. Eleanor smiled, despite herself. She was nearly to the halfway stone, a moss-covered marker that told her she was close to the birch glade. But before she reached it, she paused. The woods had quieted again. Not completely, but enough. Enough for her to feel it, the sense of something just outside the corner of her sight. A breath that wasn't hers. A stillness that did not belong. She turned slowly. The path behind her was empty. The stranger was nowhere to be seen. No footprints on the path he had offered. No imprint where he had stood. Only pines and mist and the long, thin echoes of his words. Even old paths can hide new teeth. Eleanor turned forward again. Her heart beat calmly but firmly. Her steps remained steady, and still something she could not name, followed, not with steps, but with patience. Chapter 3, Shadows at the Cottage. Eleanor reached the edge of the birch glade as the late morning sun shimmered through the leaves like golden coins falling from a dream. The familiar white trunks, smooth as bone and dappled with pale green lichen, stood like silent sentinels around the small clearing. Her grandmother's cottage nestled there, its roof bowed slightly under a carpet of moss, chimney crooked like an old man's elbow. The cottage had always felt like a heartbeat in the forest, steady, warm, constant. Eleanora could remember visiting in every season, chasing fireflies in summer dusk, picking frost-crusted herbs in winter, pressing petals into paper beside the hearth. But today the clearing felt still in a different way, not the stillness of peace, but of pause, of waiting. She slowed her steps. Something was different. The smoke from the chimney curled faintly, too faintly. Her grandmother's fire usually roared this time of day, crackling like laughter behind the windows. The shutters were closed, though they never used to be, even in rain, and the door, usually standing open to air out the drying lavender bundles, was shut fast. Eleanora's fingers tightened around her basket. She stepped closer, her boots quiet on the mossy stones of the path. "Grandmother!" she called, voice low but clear. No reply. She hesitated at the door, staring at the iron latch. It wasn't locked. The forest did not need locks, not for them, not here. But something made her pause before lifting it. The forest had gone quiet again, not fully, not unnaturally, but muffled, as though sound itself had taken a step back. Even the breeze that had followed her through the pines no longer stirred the birch leaves. She lifted the latch. The door creaked slowly open. Inside, the cottage was dim, the air cool and touched with something strange. Not rot, not foulness, but something wrong. Like a bowl of milk just beginning to sour. The hearth was dark, only a low ember pulsing under ash. Shadows clung to the corners, and on the far side of the room, in the great carved bed beside the fire, lay a shape beneath the quilt. Eleanora stepped inside. The door whispered closed behind her. "Grandmother?" she asked again. The shape in the bed stirred. "Eleanora," came a voice, rough and rasping. "Is that you, child?" She moved closer. The shadows were deep in here, as if the windows looked out onto nothing. Her basket felt heavy on her arm. Her boots made no sound on the old wooden floorboards. "I brought the honey cakes," she said gently, setting the basket on the table, "and rosemary wine, and the thyme balm you like." "Such a sweet girl," the voice murmured. "So kind to an old woman." Something in the tone gave her pause. It was familiar. "And yet, are you unwell?" Eleanora asked, staying 2 paces from the bed. A sigh, a rustle beneath the quilt. The chill came strong this time, hard to breathe, hard to move. Her fingers brushed the carved arm of a wooden chair. The old cat, usually curled by the hearth, was nowhere to be seen, nor was the knitting basket. The room bore all the signs of someone trying to seem as though nothing had changed, and failing. "Eleanora," the voice said, more clearly now, "come closer, child. Let me see you better." She hesitated. Her grandmother always called her little fox or dearling. "Never, child." Eleanora stepped to the foot of the bed, not the side. "You're covered up all the way," she said gently, "even your face." "Too cold," the voice said quickly. "Too cold to have the covers pulled back. The draught stings my bones. I can bring the fire back up," Eleanora offered, turning toward the hearth. "No, no!" The voice came faster now, sharp. "No need, no need," Just come a little closer." Eleonora turned slowly. Something moved beneath the quilt, too smoothly, like a shifting coil, and suddenly the words of her grandmother came flooding back, told once beneath a stormy sky, after a story about a man with silver eyes and a fox's grin. "Some things can wear skin like a jacket, but they don't know how to wrinkle it right. They don't blink, child. They don't shuffle. They lie too still or move too cleanly, and they never, ever get the names right." Eleonora swallowed. "Do you remember what I brought?" she asked. A pause. "Honey cakes," came the answer, "and salve for my joints." She had mentioned the wine too, and the salve had thyme, but no mention of that. Just salve, close, but not close enough. "What did you used to call me?" she asked softly. The quilt rustled again. "Child," came the voice. "Little girl, my clever one." Eleonora took a slow step backward. In the corner of the room, near the stacked woodpile, something shifted, just a flicker of movement. A glint, a sound like breath caught in bark. She turned her head. There, behind the kindling baskets, the faintest whisper, a pair of eyes. Not glowing, just wide. Watching her grandmother, alive, hidden. Eleonora's breath caught, but she did not look directly at the corner again. She turned back to the bed and forced herself to smile. "Well," she said softly, "if you're too cold to rise, perhaps I can fluff your pillow, make you more comfortable." A pause. "Yes," said the voice, and it sounded pleased. "Yes, do that, dear child." Eleonora walked lightly across the room, past the table toward the hearth where the poker lay beside the ashtray. She bent slowly, lifted it with one hand. Her heart pounded, not from fear now, but focus. She had seen the shape move. It was long, too long, not a person, not her person. She stepped to the side of the bed. The quilt rustled again. A pale hand emerged, too large, fingers too slender, joints in the wrong places. Eleonora acted. She yanked the quilt away in one swift motion. There, coiled in the blankets, was not her grandmother, but a long, lean creature with a snout and teeth too white, too many. Its fur was dark and dappled like shadow. Its limbs were wrong. Its eyes glimmered like oil. It grinned. "Ah," it whispered, "so clever, just like the old one said." Eleonora did not scream. She thrust the fire poker forward, not to stab, but to drive the creature back. It hissed, not in pain but in disgust, as if the iron offended it. The hearth burst to life behind her. A flare of flame from a match struck fast. Her grandmother had moved. Silent and fierce, she appeared beside the fire, holding the old iron pot of rosemary oil, steam rising from its lip. "Begone," the old woman said, her voice crackling like the fire, "you false, blooded shadow. This house is under names older than yours." The creature snarled, but it was already shrinking. The light, the fire, the iron, all things it could not hold shape against. Its limbs twisted, its grin faded, and in a gust of wind that seemed to rush in from nowhere, it vanished, into mist, into dust, into memory. Only the quilt remained, settling back down with a sigh. Silence. Then, after a breath, Eleanor dropped the poker and flew into her grandmother's arms. They held each other for a long time, beside the fire now roaring with real warmth. "You knew," her grandmother whispered. "You saw through it." "I listened," Eleanor murmured. "To you, to the forest." They stayed like that until the sun moved to the far edge of the glade. Later, they lit the cottage lanterns and brewed thyme tea, and Eleanor finally unpacked the honey cakes, crumbling with warmth. And in the corner, the old cat reappeared, slinking from the shadows, stretching as if she had simply been asleep. Outside, the birch trees rustled, but now they sounded like they were laughing. Chapter 4. The Truth Beneath the Fur. That night, the fire in the hearth burned with a softer kind of light, one that did not crackle so much as breathe. Shadows curled up in the rafters like resting birds. The scent of thyme and smoke drifted through the little cottage as Eleanor sat curled on the hearthrug, her red cloak bundled beside her like a sleeping fox. Her grandmother, Mira of the Glade, as the older villagers still called her, moved quietly, mending the quilt the creature had curled beneath, humming a tune that might have been a lullaby or a spell. Perhaps both. Neither of them had spoken much since the creature had fled. There were things to put right first. Salt scattered across the doorways, rosemary hung fresh above the bed frame, and a line of iron nails tapped gently into the windowsill. Not out of fear, but as a way of resetting the house's boundaries. Even the cottage itself had seemed to shift. It no longer huddled beneath the weight of something unseen. It breathed again. Only after tea was poured, golden and sharp with ginger and sage, did Eleanor finally ask the question that had curled beside her heart since the moment she saw the creature's grin. What was it? Mira didn't look up right away. She tied off her thread and tucked the needle into the edge of her sleeve. "It was a wolf," she said simply. "But not like any I've read about," Eleanor said. "It wore skin like a coat. It spoke." "Yes," said Mira, settling into her chair. "Because it wasn't always a wolf." Eleanor tilted her head. Outside, the wind rustled through the birch trees like a turning page. "Long ago," Mira began, her voice softer now, "there lived a man who wanted to know all the secrets of the forest. He walked into it with empty hands and hungry thoughts. He asked questions of the trees, demanded stories from the moss, plucked magic from mushrooms without giving thanks." Eleanor listened, eyes wide. The forest gave him answers, as it always does, but not all at once. Slowly, in pieces, a word here, a vision there, and the more he learned, the more he took. He grew powerful, he grew hollow, Mira said. He traded little things at first. His shadow, his reflection, his ability to sleep without dreaming. Then his memories, his kindness. He gave everything that made him a man, and the forest, being what it is, reshaped him. It wove him into one of its own warnings. Eleanor wrapped her arms around her knees. "So now he's cursed?" Mira nodded. "He walks as a beast, but he remembers what it was like to wear a name. That's why he's dangerous. He doesn't eat to feed. He eats to belong." The fire hissed gently in the grate. Eleanor thought of the creature's eyes, how they caught the light but reflected nothing, how it smiled, but the smile belonged to a memory. "Is it dead now?" she asked. "No." Mira's gaze was steady, just scattered, chased from the shape it stole. "It will take time to reform, but it always tries again." Eleanor looked into her teacup. "Because that's what wolves do?" Mira shook her head. "Because that's what hunger does." They sat in silence after that. The moon rose late, pale as milk and ringed with thin silver mist. It cast the glade in quiet light, enough that the wildflowers seemed to glow at the edges of their petals. Eventually, Mira brought out her grandmother's book, the one bound in green leather and clasped with an old copper pin. She turned the pages with care, letting Eleanor see sketches of herbs and roots, handwritten notes in curling ink, spells written more like poems than commands. But Eleanor wasn't looking at the pages. She was looking at the person holding them, her grandmother's hands, lined and steady, her eyes so like her own, her voice full of thorns and honey. "You knew what it was," Eleanor said quietly. "From the start." "I suspected," Mira admitted, "but I had to be sure. These things, they wear many faces. If I challenged it too soon, I might have been the one who vanished." "But you hid." "I waited," said Mira. "I trusted you." Those 3 words fell like soft bells. Eleanor didn't know what to say. She'd felt brave in the moment, brave with the poker, with her questions, with her choice to listen to the forest. But now, looking back, it had all felt like guessing, like standing still in a storm and hoping to remain upright. "You did more than I ever could have taught you," Mira said gently, closing the book. "You saw it for what it was. You remembered." Eleanor's cheeks flushed, but she looked up. "Will it follow me again?" Mira's eyes softened. "It might try." Eleanor nodded, taking a breath. "Then I'll be ready." That night she slept under a quilt that still smelled faintly of wolf, but also of lavender and wood smoke and home. The fire burned low, and the cottage creaked with comfort. But in her dreams, Eleanor didn't see the wolf. She saw the forest, wide and endless and rich with song. She walked through it barefoot, her red cloak brushing the ferns, her steps light and certain. Shadows watched her, but none dared draw close. She was not afraid. She was becoming something more. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The sky was a washed-out blue, and the frost glistened in a lace of white across the glade. Mira packed Eleanor's basket again, this time with rosemary oil, slices of oat cake, and 3 iron nails wrapped in blue thread. "For your pockets," she said. Eleanor pulled on her cloak, now mended where the hem had torn, and kissed her grandmother's cheek. "I'll walk home the long way," she said, "through the old stones." Mira raised an eyebrow. "You're not afraid?" Eleanor smiled. "I am, a little, but I'll listen." She set off down the path, the cloak flaring behind her like a sunrise. Birds called from the canopy. The wind curled around her in a lazy swirl. The forest did not feel heavy now. It felt vast, like a story waiting to be written. She passed the bend where the strange path had opened days before. It was gone now. Only bramble and root remained, as if the forest had folded that illusion back into its dreaming. But still, Eleonora paused. She plucked a sprig of yarrow from the base of a tree and laid it gently on the ground. "For what you were," she whispered, "and for what you lost." The air shifted, not warm, not cold, just awake. Then she turned and walked on. The wolf, wherever it drifted now, whether in fog or memory or tangled dreams, had felt her kindness. And perhaps, in time, it would remember more of the man than the beast. But for now, the girl in the red cloak walked through the woods unafraid, not because danger had vanished, but because she had met it and listened and endured, and that, the forest agreed, was enough. Chapter 5. Homeward with the dawn. The sun rose like a secret whispered to the sky, pale gold spilling across the treetops, warming bark, brightening moss, and painting the mist in tender light. Birds stirred, lifting songs like threads into the air, and through this waking woodland walked Eleonora. Her red cloak flickered through the ferns, more flame than fabric, catching the morning rays with every step. But she did not hurry. Her basket was lighter than before, not just because of the gifts already delivered, but because something inside her had unknotted. The forest, too, had changed, or perhaps she had learned to see it more clearly. The hush between trees no longer felt like warning, but like reverence. The shadows no longer seemed to lurk. They rested. Even the air moved with purpose, brushing gently past her cheeks as if in greeting. She stopped once at a clearing, one she had never noticed before, though she must have passed it a dozen times. The grass was long and silvered with dew. A single stone stood at its centre, upright and ancient, with spiral carvings softened by rain. She walked to it slowly and laid her hand upon its cold surface. "I see you now," she whispered, "and I thank you." The stone said nothing, but the breeze picked up, circling her once like a cat before moving on. By mid-morning, the forest began to thin. The trail widened, bordered now by low hedges and familiar roots. In the distance, she could see the chimney smoke of her own cottage rising like a ribbon into the sky. She didn't walk faster. She let her feet carry her at the same quiet pace. The walk home was no longer about arrival. It was a procession, a soft closing of a chapter. At the gate, her mother was waiting. Maren stood with her hands in her apron pockets, eyes squinting slightly in the sunlight. She said nothing at first, only opened the gate and held it steady as Eleonora stepped through. "Then you're taller than you were 2 days ago." Eleonora smiled. "Not much." Maren touched her daughter's cheek, brushing aside a stray curl. "Your eyes say different." They went inside. The hearth still burned low from that morning's kindling. The kettles steamed faintly on the hob. Eleanora set down her basket, now filled with only small tokens, a twist of birch bark, a feather, the yarrow sprig she had offered and later picked up again. Over oatcakes and berry compote, Eleanora told her mother everything, not all at once, but slowly, like rain seeping into soil. She spoke of the man in the silver-buttoned coat, the false path, the wrong-voiced creature in the bed. She told of her grandmother's fire, the spell of kindness, the slow return of her own breath to her body. Marin listened without interrupting. When Eleanora was done, she poured her another cup of tea and said simply, "You listened." "I remembered," Eleanora replied. "That's the same thing." Later, while the birds gathered at the window-sill and the bees returned to the garden's lavender, Eleanora fetched her grandmother's book. She opened to a blank page near the back, one left for notes or dreams, and began to write. Not just what had happened, but how it felt. The weight of the forest's breath, the shine of false smiles, the taste of rosemary on her tongue, the hush that had curled around her when she had dared to speak plainly, even in fear. She wrote until her fingers cramped and the light outside turned soft and golden. Then she turned the page, pressed a wild rose petal between its leaves, and shut the book. That evening, just before the first stars blinked into being, Eleanora stepped into the garden. She stood there for a long time, looking out toward the line of trees that marked the beginning of the forest. They no longer loomed. They waited, not hungrily, but patiently. As if the woods, too, knew that stories were not over when the danger passed, they lingered and grew and echoed. A wind rose, slow and cool. It played with the hem of her cloak, teasing the red wool as it lifted and curled. She let it carry her thoughts away, and far, far beyond the edge of the glade, where the trees grew thickest, where sunlight came filtered and green, where the roots twisted like knuckles in the soil, something stirred. A ripple through the moss, a shimmer in the fog, a shape not quite whole, gathering. It remembered warmth, it remembered hunger, and it remembered the girl in red who had looked it in the eyes, not with fear, but with something stranger. Pity, understanding, and a word softly spoken like a bell. "I see you." The shape paused, folded, waited, not gone, not forgiven, but changed perhaps. Stories could do that. Seasons passed, as they always do, and though the tale of Little Red Riding Hood spread far, embroidered in taverns, whispered in lullabies, illustrated in woodcut pages, few knew the truth of her walk through the woods. They said she was clever and brave and lucky. They did not say that she listened. They did not say that she waited. They did not say that the red of her cloak glowed, not because it was fine, but because it had been stitched with love and warnings and old wild roses. But those who walked the forest paths carefully, who paused when the wind grew strange, or knelt beside old stones to offer a petal or a promise, they knew. And sometimes, if you were very quiet, you could hear the whisper of a cloak in the distance, not running, not fleeing, but walking steadily onward, deeper into the story.